Lee Money here for Redline Radio LLC. And if you like fast trucks or if you just like racing, check out the CRS Super Truck Series. They are the premier race series of Redline Radio LLC. For sponsorship opportunities, you can give Billy a call at 216-217-5038. And make sure you let Billy know you heard about the CRS Truck Series right here on Redline Radio LLC. Money's Crazy Mind is brought to you by Incredible Keepsakes. At Incredible Keepsakes, cherished moments are made to last forever. T-shirts, binders, cups, you name it, Incredible Keepsakes can make it. Reach out to them today at IncredibleKeepsakes.com or 440-242-9648. Don't forget to mention you heard about them on Redline Radio LLC. If you need auto parts, there's only one place that I know I go. Detroit Auto Parts is the official parts store of Redline Radio LLC. They have two convenient locations on the east side. You can call 216-531-7373, or on the west side, call 216-398-7373. Mention Redline Radio and receive 10% off your purchase. The official home and auto parts store of Redline Radio LLC. Redline Radio is proud to partner with Growing Wings Adult Services, the proud sponsor of our state-of-the-art production studio. The team at Growing Wings has over 7 years' experience of helping adults with disabilities in the Northeast Ohio area. If Lisa Summers and the team at Growing Wings can help your family, contact them at 234-334-7547 today. And mention that you heard all about Growing Wings right here on Redline Radio LLC. After a long day of gambling and checking out all the shows and sites that Las Vegas has to offer, why don't you check out the saloon that has been voted the biggest hole-in-the-wall saloon for the past 2 years? Redline Radio's favorite spot to get a nice cold beverage after a long day in Vegas, the Rusty Spur Saloon. And make sure you let them know that you heard about them right here on Redline Radio LLC. Money's Crazy Mind and Redline Radio LLC is proudly sponsored by Tattoo Therapy Inc. in the Greenbrier Shopping Center at 6259 Pearl Road, Parma Heights, Ohio. You can contact Riley today at 440-747-7130. They are one of the premier tattoo parlors in Northeast Ohio. And don't forget to tell them that Redline Radio sent you.
Warning. Money's Crazy Mind contains language that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. Will be completely ignored.
Oh, it's Psych Ward time. It's definitely Psych Ward time. And that's exactly who you're listening to. And if you're listening to Psych Ward, then that most certainly means it's Friday night. It's 8:30. It's not 8 o'clock. Little bit of a late start here. Apologize about that. What's going on, everybody? What's going on? We're going to let the psych ward play out here a little bit. Welcome into the asylum. It's Friday night. I thought this was going to be a fun topic this week. It's spooky season, and there ain't nothing more spooky than the Godfather of the occult. The man that is the reason that a lot of the things that involve the occult exist. So we're going to discuss all of that here today. Little disappointed. You know, I watched Halloween Ends last night. Movie was not all that good. Very disappointed. I thought they could have ended it a lot better, but that's neither here nor there. Want to thank my boys in Psych Ward for letting me use that. The song's called Fright Night. Perfect one for spooky season. Perfect one for spooky season. What's going on, everybody? What's going on? All right. So before we get in to discussing Aleister Crowley, a couple things I need to get off my chest here. First up is this. Tomorrow, Redline Radio LLC is going to be broadcasting and streaming for you live all of the racing action from Lorraine Raceway Park. It is part of their Halloween festival. We're going to be streaming all the action live. Racing starts at 6 p.m., so get ready. Be on the lookout for that. And then next Friday night, myself and Lex Vegas will be live streaming from the grand reopening of Tattoo Therapy Inc. Can't wait to see everybody there. And yours truly is going... don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. I am ruining the illusion. Yours truly is going to be getting tattooed live on the air. So there is that. The folks in the studio audience agree. It's going to be a fun time, man. I'm really looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to interviewing Rye. Him and I go way back. So it's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a real fun time. I can't wait to broadcast live from there. So hopefully everybody will check out the show next week. For that, like I said, we're just gonna have fun. It's gonna be a fun time. And then other than that, I mean, we have a few other events coming up. We'll talk about those later. But let's jump right into it now. Do you all see my buddy Spawn over there in the corner? Spawn's hanging out in the graveyard looking for his body. You know, he's trying to figure out about that deal he made with Malbolgia. So we're doing something kind of different this year with spooky season. So as you can see, I got some horror themed backgrounds behind me. In each background, there's going to be a hidden character or a couple of hidden characters. So if you guys find the hidden characters and you want to call them out, feel free, call them out on the air. You don't win anything, but I just think it'd be fun. All right, but let's get to talking here a little bit about Aleister Crowley, and where a lot of his ideals and things came from. So Aleister Crowley, for those that may not know, is known as the Godfather of the Occult. And he is the basis, according to the writer of all the James Bond books, he was the basis of every Bond villain ever, starting with Le Chiffre in Casino Royale. So let's talk about some of his beliefs, and then we'll get into some of the things that he did in his life. So Crowley's belief system, Thelma, has been described by scholars as a religion, and more specifically as both a new religious movement and a magico-religious doctrine. It has also been characterized as a form of esotericism and modern paganism. Although holding the Book of Law, which was composed in 1904 as its central text, Thelma took shape as a complete system in the years after 1904. In his autobiography, Crowley claimed that his purpose in life had been to bring Oriental wisdom to Europe and restore paganism in a pure form. Although what he meant by paganism was unclear, Crowley also wrote in the fourth book of Magic about a great pagan umbral fleet ruled by Octavius that would be handed down to the great Spartan. The esoteric nature of this was so unclear, Crowley's thought was not always cohesive and was influenced by a variety of sources, ranging from Eastern religious movements and practices like Hindu yoga and Buddhism, scientific naturalism, and various currents within Western esotericism, among them ceremonial magic, alchemy, astrology, Rosicrucianism, Kabbalah, and the tarot. He was steeped in the esoteric teaching he had also learned from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, although pushed further with his own interpretations and strategies than the Golden Dawn had done. Crowley incorporated concepts and terminology from South Asian religious traditions like yoga and tantra into his Thelmic system, believing that there was a fundamental underlying resemblance between Western and Eastern spiritual systems. The historian Alex Owen noted that Crowley adhered to the modus operandi of the decadent movement throughout his life. Crowley believed that the 20th century marked humanity's entry into the Aeon of Horus, a new era which humans would take increasing control of their destiny. He believed that in this Aeon, following from the Aeon of Osiris, in which paternalistic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism dominated the world, and that this in turn had followed the Aeon of Isis, which had been maternalistic and dominated by goddess worship. He believed that Thelma was the proper religion of the Aeon of Horus, and also deemed himself to be the prophet of this new Aeon. Thelma revolves around the idea that human beings each have their own true will, and that they should discover and pursue, and that this exists in harmony with the cosmic will that pervades the universe. Crowley referred to this process of searching and discoveries of one's true will to be the great work, or that attaining of the knowledge and conservation of the holy guardian angel. His favored method of doing so was through the performance of the Abrahamian operation, a ceremonial magic ritual obtained from a 17th century grimoire. The moral code of do what thou wilt is believed by Thelmanites to be the religion's ethical law. Although the historian of religion Marco Passi noted that this was not anarchistic or libertarian in structure, as Crowley saw individuals as part of a wider societal organism. So there's a couple different layers of his belief system here. So we're going to go through those different layers of his belief system. And then, like I said, we'll go back and we'll jump into some of the methods of his personal life and things of that nature. So the magic and the theology. Crowley believed in the objective existence of magic, which he chose to spell magic, Magick, instead of just the Magic. An older archaic spelling of the word, he provided various different definitions of this term over his career. In his book, Magic in Theory and Practice, Crowley defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. He also told his disciple Karl Germer that magic is getting into communication with individuals who exist on a higher plane than ours. Mysticism is the raising of oneself to their level. Crowley saw magic as a third way between religion and science, giving the equinox the subtitle of the method of science, the aim of religion. Within that journal, he expressed positive sentiments towards science and the scientific method and urged magicians to keep detailed record of their magical experiments. The more scientific the record is, the better. His understanding of magic was also influenced by the work of anthropologist James Frazer, in particular, the view that magic was a precursor to science in a cultural evolutionary framework. Unlike Frazer, however, Crowley did not see magic as a survival form, as a survival from the past that required eradication, but rather he believed that magic had to be adapted to suit the new age of science. In Crowley's alternative schema, old systems of magic had to decline, per Frazer's framework, so that science and magic could synthesize into magic, which would simultaneously accept the existence of the supernatural and the experimental method. Crowley deliberately adapted an exceptionally broad definition of magic that included almost all forms of technology as magic, adopting an instrumentalist interpretation of magic, science, and technology. To quote R. Hutton, to Crowley, the greatest aim of magician was to merge with a higher power connected to the well springs of the universe, but he did not trouble himself too much to define that power consistently. Sometimes it was God, sometimes the One, sometimes a goddess, and sometimes one's own holy guardian angel or higher self. In the last analysis, he was content for the nature of divinity to remain a mystery. As a result, he wrote at times like an atheist, at times like a monothesis, and at others like a polythesis. So you can already see here that there's a lot of conflicting theologies that go into the things that Aleister Crowley was trying to put forth to his followers. Now, here's another strange wrinkle into that whole story. Sexuality played an important role in Crowley's ideas about magic and his practice of it, and has been described as being central to Thelema, or Thelema, maybe. He outlined 3 forms of sex magic: the autoerotic, homosexual, and heterosexual, and argued that such acts could be used to focus the magician's will onto a specific goal, such as financial gain or personal creative process. For Crowley, sex was treated as a sacrament, with the consumption of sexual fluids interpreted as a Eucharist. This was often manifested as the cakes of light, a biscuit containing either menstrual blood or a mixture of semen and vaginal fluids. The Gnostic Mass is the central religious ceremony within Thelema. Crowley's theological beliefs were not clear. The historian Ronald Hutton noted that some of Crowley's writings could be used to argue that he was an atheist, while some support the idea that he was a polytheist, and others would bolster the idea that he was a mystical monotheist. On the basis of teachings in the Book of Law, Crowley described a pantheon of three deities taken from an ancient Egyptian pantheon: Nuit, Hadit, and Rahor Kuit. In 1928, he made the claim that all true deities were derived from this trinity. Jason Josephson Storm, that is a tongue twister and a half, has argued that Crowley built on 19th century attempts to link early Christianity to pre-Christian religions such as Fraser's Golden Bough to synthesize Christian theology and neo-paganism while remaining critical of institutional and traditional Christianity. Both during his life and after it, Crowley has been widely described as a Satanist, usually by detractors. Crowley stated he did not consider himself a Satanist, nor did he worship Satan, as he did not accept the Christian worldview in which Satan was believed to exist. He nevertheless used satanic imagery, for instance, describing himself as the Beast 666 and referring to the Whore of Babylon in his work, while in later life he sent anti-Christmas cards to his friends. In his writings, Crowley occasionally identified Aiwass as Satan and designated him as our Lord God the Devil at one occasion. The scholar of religion Gordon Jurdovic stated that Crowley was emphatically not a Satanist. Quote, if for no other reason than simply because he did not identify himself as such. End quote. Crowley nevertheless expressed strong anti-Christian sentiment, stating he hated Christianity, quote, as socialists hate soap, end quote. An animosity probably stemming from his experiences among the Plymouth Brethren. He was nevertheless influenced by the King James Bible, especially the Book of Revelation, the impact of which can be seen in his writings. He was also accused of advocating human sacrifice, largely because of a passage in Book 4, which he stated that, quote, a male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory victim, and added that he had sacrificed about 150 every year. This was a tongue-in-cheek reference to ejaculation, something not realized by his critics. So, while he may not actually classify himself as being a Satanist, as you heard there, a lot of the things that he was doing were the basis of the Church of Satan, which was later doctrined after a lot of Crowley's teachings during this time. And, you don't get the nickname, the Godfather of the Occult, if there isn't a reason to. So in his personal life, Crowley considered himself to be one of the outstanding figures of his time. Historian Ronald Hutton stated that in Crowley's youth, he was a self-indulgent and flamboyant young man who set about a deliberate flouting and provocation of social and religious norms. While being shielded from an outraged public opinion by his inherited wealth, Hutton also described Crowley as having both an unappeasable desire to take control of any organization that he belonged to and a tendency to quarrel savagely with those who challenged him. Crowley biographer Martin Booth asserted that Crowley was, quote, self-confident, brash, eccentric, egotistic, highly intelligent, arrogant, witty, wealthy, and when suited him, cruel. Similarly, Richard B. Spence noted that Crowley was capable of immense physical and emotional cruelty. Biographer Lawrence Sutton noted that Crowley exhibited courage, skill, dauntless energy, and remarkable focus of will, while at the same time showing a blind arrogance, petty fits of bile, and contempt for the abilities of his fellow men. The Thelemite Lon Milo Duquette noted that Crowley was by no means perfect and often alienated those who loved him dearest. All right, so those were some of his beliefs and theologies. So what I want to do now is just kind of talk about who he was born as, and how he got this nickname as the Godfather of the occult. Hello, Michael. So he was born Edward Alexander Crowley on October 12th, 1875, and he died on December 1st, 1947. He hung in there a while, didn't he? He was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, painter, novelist, and mountaineer. He founded the religion of Thelema, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus in the early 20th century. A prolific writer, he published widely over the course of his life. He was born to a wealthy family in Royal Leamington Spa, Worcestershire. Crowley rejected his parents' fundamentalist Christian Plymouth Brethren faith to pursue an interest in Western esotericism. He was educated at the Trinity College at the University of Cambridge, where he focused his attentions on mountaineering and poetry. Resulting in several publications, some biographers allege that here he was recruited into a British intelligence agency, further suggested that he remained a spy throughout his life, and in 1898 joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was trained in the ceremonial magic by Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers and Alan Bennett. He went mountaineering in Mexico with Oscar Eckenstein before studying Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. In 1904, he married Rose Edith Kelly, and they honeymooned in Cairo, Egypt, where Crowley claimed to have been contacted by a supernatural entity named Iwas, who was providing him with the Book of the Law, a sacred text that served as the basis of Thelemism, Thelemia. I'm going to stop right there. Does this sound familiar to anybody else? Or am I the only one that's picking up Church of Latter-day Saint and Scientology vibes just from that one sentence that I read right there? It's interesting to note that a lot of what the Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormons, and Scientology practice, or at least base their theology on, has a lot of similarities to the other things that a lot of the things that Aleister Crowley was talking about during his time. And we're talking almost 100 years before. So I do find that kind of interesting. That you can see the similarities and the theologies there between those three religions. All three of them are based in some kind of extraterrestrial visitation. And if you don't believe me, there's a great South Park episode called The Book of Mormon that talks about all the things that the Mormons believe. And all of it is taken straight from the Book of Mormon. So announcing the start of the Eon of Horus, the book declared that its followers should, quote, do what thou wilt and seek to align themselves with their true will through the practice of magic. After the unsuccessful 1905 Kachinjunga expedition and a visit to India and China, Crowley returned to Britain, where he attracted attention as a prolific author of poetry, novels, and occult literature. In 1907, he and George Cecil Jones co-founded an esoteric order, the AA, through which they propagated Thelema. After spending time in Algeria in 1912, he was initiated into another esoteric order, the German-based Order Templi Orienta, or OTO, Orientis, or the OTO, rising to become the leader of its British branch, which he reformulated in accordance with his Thelemanite beliefs. Through the OTO, Thelemite groups were established in Britain, Australia, and North America. Crowley spent the First World War in the United States, where he took up painting and campaigned for the German war effort against Britain, later revealing that he had infiltrated the pro-German religious commune Cefalù, Sicily, where he lived with various followers. Hang on. I skipped a sentence there. Later revealing that he had infiltrated the pro-German movement to assist the British intelligence services. In 1920, he established the Abbey of Thelema, a religious commune in Sicily, where he lived with various followers. His libertine lifestyle led to denunciations in the British press, and the Italian government evicted him in 1923. He divided the following 2 decades between France, Germany, and England, and continued to promote Thelema until his death. Crowley gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime, being a recreational drug user, bisexual, and an individualist social critic. Crowley has remained a highly influential figure over Western esotericism and the counterculture of the 1960s, and continues to be considered a prophet in Thelema. He is the subject of various biographies and academic studies. So that's just kind of where he started this. I believe it's called Thelema. It's Thelema. So it's either that or it's Thelma, which I don't think it's Thelma, but Thelema maybe. So he kind of bounced around Europe quite a bit, trying to get this religious started. Joining some pretty sketchy groups like the OTO, and establishing an Abbey of Thelema. And that is also very similar to Jim Jones, the Branch Davidians. With Jim Jones with Jonestown. So you can kind of see a lot of this cult like stuff that's happening here. And the fact that counterculture of the 1960s was influenced over some of the Crowley stuff, you can kind of see where Victor Fleming, the creator of the James Bond stories, would be influenced by somebody like Aleister Crowley. We're going to skip over his early life and his youth. None of that is really important. I want to get into his college years here. So Cambridge University, he was there from 1895 to 1898. He adopted the name of Aleister over Edward in October of 1895. Crowley began a 3-year course at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he was entered for the moral science tripos studying philosophy. With approval from his personal tutor, he changed to English literature, which was not then part of the curriculum offered. Crowley spent much of his time at university engaged in his pastimes, becoming president of the chess club and practicing the game for 2 hours a day. He was briefly considered a professional career as a chess player. Crowley also embraced his love of literature and poetry, particularly the works of Richard Francis Burton and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Many of his own poems appeared in student publications such as the Granta, Cambridge Magazine, and Cantab. He continued his mountaineering, going on holiday to the Alps to climb every year from 1894 to 1898, often with his friend Oster Eckenstein, and in 1897 made the first ascent of the Monk without a guide. These feats led to recognition in the alpine mountaineering community. Quote, "For many years I had loathed being called Alec, particularly because of the unpleasant sounds and sight of the word. Partly because it was the name by which my mother called me. Edward did not seem to suit me, and the diminutives Ted or Ned were even less appropriate. Alexander was too long, and Sandy suggested toe hair and freckles. I had read in some book or other that the most favorable name for becoming famous was one consisting of a dactyl followed by a spondy, as the Gaelic form of Alexander. Oh, as at the end of a hexameter. Like Jeremy Taylor, Aleister Crowley fulfilled these conditions, and Aleister is the Gaelic form of Alexander. To adopt it would satisfy my romantic ideals." And that's what Aleister Crowley said about his name change. Crowley had his first significant mystical experience while on holiday in Stockholm in December 1896. Several biographers, including Lawrence Sutin, Richard Kaczynski, and Tobias Churton, believed that this was the result of Crowley's first same-sex sexual experience, which enabled him to recognize his bisexuality. At Cambridge, Crowley maintained a vigorous sex life with women, largely female prostitutes, from one of which he caught syphilis. He eventually took part in same-sex activities, despite their illegality. In October 1897, Crowley met Herbert Charles Pollitt, president of the Cambridge University Footlights Dramatic Club, and the two entered into a relationship. They broke apart because Pollitt did not share Crowley's increasing interest in Western esotericism, a breakup that Crowley would regret for many, many years. In 1897, Crowley traveled to St. Petersburg in Russia, later saying he was trying to learn Russian as he was considering a future diplomatic career there. In October 1897, a brief illness triggered considerations of mortality and the futility of the human endeavor. Crowley abandoned all thoughts of a diplomatic career in favor for pursuing an interest in the occult. So it was a same-sex relationship, and the fact that he got so ill that he almost died that made Crowley almost consider looking into the occult. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Does anybody else find it a little weird that that's the one thing that kind of made him decide that he wanted to move on from a lot of the things that he was practicing? The fact that he had this same-sex relationship in Stockholm, and that's what made him decide, and that's the thought that gave him magical powers and such and such. But in March of 1898, he obtained A.E. Waite's The Book of Black Magic and of Pacts, and then Karl von Eckarthause's The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary. I wish I could make these names up, but I can't. I just can't. Furthering his occult interests. That same year, Crowley privately published 100 copies of his poem, Ekalamida, A Place to Bury Strangers In, but it was not a particular success. Ekeldama was issued by Leonard Smithers. That same year, Crowley published a string of other poems, including White Stains, a decadent collection of erotic poetry that was printed abroad lest its publication being prohibited by the British authorities. In July 1898, he left Cambridge, not having taken any degree at all, despite a, quote, first-class showing in his 1897 exams and consistent second-class honors results before that. So we're getting up to the point where he joins the Golden Dawn, which he joined in 1898 and was in it for just one year, 1898 to 1899. In August of 1898, Crowley was in Zermatt, Switzerland, where he met the chemist Julian L. Baker, and the two began discussing their common interests in alchemy. Back in London, Baker introduced Crowley to George Cecil Jones, Baker's brother-in-law, and a fellow member of the occult society known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which had been founded in 1888. Crowley was initiated into the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn on November 18th, 1898, by the group's leader, Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers. The ceremony took place in the Golden Dawn's Isa Uranus Temple, held at London's Mark Mason's Hall, where Crowley took the magical motto and named Frater Perdurabo, which was interpreted as I shall endure to the end. Crowley moved into his own luxury flat at 67 to 69 Chancery Lane and soon invited a senior Golden Dawn member, Alan Bennett, to live with him as his personal magical tutor. Bennett taught Crowley more about the ceremonial magic and the ritual of using drugs, and together they performed the rituals of Goetia until Bennett left for South Asia to study Buddhism. In November 1899, Crowley purchased Bollockstein House in Foyers on the shore of Loch Ness in Scotland. He developed a love of Scottish culture, describing himself as the Laird of Bolkenstein, and took to wearing traditional Highland dress even during his visits to London. He continued writing poetry, publishing Jezebel and other tragic poems, Tales of Arceus, Songs of the Spirit, Appeal to the American Republic, and Japhath in 1898 to 1899. Most gained mixed reviews from literary critics, although Japhatha was considered a particular critical success. Crowley soon progressed to the lower grades of the Golden Dawn and was ready to enter the group's inner second order. He was unpopular in the group. His bisexuality and libertine lifestyle had gained him a bad reputation, and he had developed feuds with some of the members, including W.B. Yeats. When the Golden Dawn's London Lodge refused to initiate Crowley into the Second Order, he visited Mathers in Paris, who personally admitted him into the Edifice Minor grade. A schism had developed between Mathers and the London members of the Golden Dawn, who were unhappy with his autocratic rule. Acting under Mathers' orders, Crowley, with the help of his mistress and fellow initiate Elaine Simpson, attempted to seize the vault of the Adepts and a temple space at 36 Blythe Road in West Kensington from the London Lodge members. When the case was taken to court, the judge ruled in favor of the London Lodge, as they had paid for the space's rent, leaving both Crowley and Mathers isolated from the group. So from there, he went to Mexico, India, Paris, and he got married. In 1900, Crowley traveled to Mexico through the United States, settling in Mexico City and starting a relationship with a local woman. So a lot of this is just him going through the different areas that he went through. So when he was in Paris in November 1902, he socialized with his friend and painter Gerard Kelly, and through him became a fixture of the Parisian art scene. Whilst there, Crowley wrote a series of poems on the work of an acquaintance, the sculptor Auguste Rodin. These poems were later published as Rodin in Rhyme. One of those frequenting the milieu was W. Somerset Maugham, after briefly meeting Crowley, used him as a model of the character Oliver Hideo in his novel The Magician. He returned to Boleskine in April 1903. In August, Crowley wed Gerald Kelly's sister Rose Edith Kelly in a, quote, marriage of convenience to prevent her from entering an arranged marriage. The marriage appalled the Kelly family and damaged his friendship with Gerald. Heading on a honeymoon to Paris, Cairo, and then Ceylon, Crowley fell in love with Rose and worked to prove his affections. While on his honeymoon, he wrote her a series of love poems published as Rosa Mundi and Other Love Songs, as well of authoring the religious satire, Why Jesus Wept. So we're now getting to the part where he is developing his religion thelema, and when in his travels to Cairo as well. I think that's a good stopping point. Let's go ahead and jump to break here. When we come back, we will start talking all about the things that Aleister Crowley was entering into his religious stances here. We're going to go a little old school here this week with some of the songs that we're playing. And we are going to play a couple of songs by Psych Ward. The first one is entitled Mob Like Family. And when we come back, like I said, more on the historical teachings of one Aleister Crowley and when he formed his religious order, Thelema. All that when we return on Money's Crazy Mind. Be right back.
Nobody can touch you now. I'm your man. Jesus Christ couldn't touch you because I represent you. So, Keep your nose clean, be a good earner, follow the rules, and who knows, maybe one day when they open the books, you get straightened out. Become a wise guy, a made guy. Come on, lift your glass.
We mob like family, we mob like family, we mob like family, we mob. The world is mine, so fuck the rest. Yeah, fucking with me, y'all fucking with the best. I'm untouchable like alcohol, leaving motherfuckers minds blown. So I'm from the bottom and get to the top. Don't give a fuck about a bitch ass cop. Sonny Black brought you in and said you were down. Now you're breaking bread, talking family now. At the call last night, things didn't go right. Had a bull rank, had a call Mr. White. He said blind started freaking, pink started drinking. Got me thinking of what to do. There's a rat in the family and I think it's you. So we rally up the crew and we ready to ride. We mob like family and you die tonight. When I say mob like y'all say family, we mob like family, we mob like family. When I say we mob like y'all say family, we mob like 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 family, we mob. Baseball bat to the back of your toe. Why couldn't you just leave it alone? You're fucking with family, you're fucking with me. I'ma have to push you 3 feet deep in the shallow grave for a shallow ass snitch. Ran to the fence like a scared little bitch. Told them all the other hidden shit that I did. Murder men, women, even little ass kids. So what you gonna do when witness protection can't save ya? What happened to all the love that I had gave ya? I brought you in and I made you family. And this is how you go and repay me. Run behind my back and run your mouth. I'ma make sure another word never comes out. Close the case and close the trunk. This is what happens to a bitch ass punk when we mob like family, 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 we mob.
Redline Radio would also like to thank our newest sponsors, All Access Realty and Frank Sobochan. And if you or your family is looking to sell their home or looking to buy a new home, look no further than Frank at All Access Realty. Frank served the country as a veteran, and now he's serving the community. Also, if your business needs an upgrade, he can help. Call Frank today at 440-391-7430. Or if you need to email him, you can reach him at Frank S at All Access Realty, actually, All Access CLE Realty.com. Oh, yeah, their diamond saw blades have been rated #1 by their customers. Dynatech is your one-stop shop for diamond saw blades, drill heads, anything you need for your construction job. Dynatech is the place to go. You can reach them at 800-446-9001. Email them at sales@dynatech.com, or you can reach them at their website, www.dynatech.com. Man, I'll tell you what, all these water main breaks that we keep having here in Parma, there is no other place that I would rather call than Smith's Drain Service, LLC. They do sewer lines, bathtub and laundry lines, septic lines, kitchen sink lines, floor drains and downspouts, and so much more. Family owned and operated and local to Cleveland. Call today, 440-242-8704. And welcome to our latest sponsor. If you're looking for good food and a good night out on the town here in Parma, then look no further than Lucy's Seafood and Steakhouse, the old Brooklyn Shenanigans Pub. They're at 2218 Broadview Road in Cleveland, 44109. And you can give them a call to order your food today, and you can order online and they deliver. 216-675-0013. And you can watch every Cleveland Browns game in their facility. And on October 5th, the guys from Talking About Balls will be there broadcasting live.
Oh wow, that sounds really great. Wow, that sounds like a really good deal.
Who are you talking to?
The Northeast Ohio Ghostbusters.
Hello, Northeast Ohio Ghostbusters. What are you wearing?
Khakis?
Well, that sounds hideous.
Well, they're Ghostbusters.
We're back. The pills I was taking didn't want to swallow. Sorry about that. We are discussing the Godfather of the Occult, Mr. Aleister Crowley. Let me move away from here. Really don't like being that close to the girl from the Ring, but you can't see that cool Redline Radio Halloween logo that I made there, hanging out on the roof of the house there, or one of the pitches of the house, I guess I should say. All right. Huge shout out to Psych Ward again this week. Really appreciate everything that those guys have done for me. Working on something special with those guys too. So stay tuned for all of that. That's going to be coming in the middle of November. But let's jump back into it here. We are up to the point where Aleister Crowley is developing his religion, Thelema. He traveled to Egypt and discovered the Book of Law in 1904. And the opening lines, wow, that's loud, to the Book of Law are stated as follows. Had the manifestation of Nuit, the unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star. Every number is infinite, and there is no difference. Help me, O warrior, Lord of Thebes, in my unveiling before the children of men. So in February of 1904, Crowley and Rose arrived in Cairo, claiming to be a prince and princess. They rented an apartment in which Crowley set up a temple room and began invoking ancient Egyptian deities while studying Islamic mysticism and Arabic. According to Crowley's later account, Rose regularly became delirious and informed him, "They are waiting for you." On March 18th, she explained that they were the god Horus. And on March 20th proclaimed that the equinox of the gods has come. She led him to a nearby museum where she showed him a 7th century BCE mortuary stele known as the Stele of Aachen and Konsu. Crowley thought it important and that the exhibit's number was 666, the number of the beast in Christian belief, and in later years termed the artifact the Stele of the Revealing. According to Crowley's later statements, on April 8th, he heard a disembodied voice claiming to be that of Iwas, the messenger of Horus, or Hur-Par-Krat. Crowley said that he wrote down everything the voice told him over the course of the next 3 days and titled it Liber al-Veliges, or the Book of the Law. The book proclaimed that humanity was entering a new eon and that Crowley would serve as its prophet. It stated that the supreme moral law was to be introduced in this time with their will. The book, or this book, and the philosophy that it espoused became the cornerstone of Crowley's religion, Thelema. Crowley said that at the time he had been unsure what to do with the Book of the Law, often resenting it. He said that he ignored its instructions, which the text commanded him to perform, which included taking the Stele of the Revealing from the museum, fortifying his own island, and translating the book into all the world's religions. According to his own account, he instead sent typescripts of the work to several occultists he knew, putting the manuscript away and ignoring it. So that song that just ended there was Funny Bone, which was the original theme song to Money's Crazy Mind. And that is this week's Money's Crazy Moment. We got a lot more to get to with Aleister Crowley, so we're not going to do an actual Money's Crazy Moment this week. But I wanted to play that song, seeing as it was the original theme song to Money's Crazy Mind. Returning to Bolensky, Crowley came to believe that Mathers had begun using magic against him, and the relationship between the two broke down. On July 28th, 1905, Rose gave birth to Crowley's first child, a daughter named Lilith. With Crowley writing the pornographic snowdrops from a curate's garden to entertain his recuperating wife, he also founded a publishing company through which to publish his poetry, naming it the Society for the Propagation of Religious Truth, in parody of the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. Among its first publication were Crowley's collected works, edited by Ivor Black, an old friend of Crowley's who was both a practicing surgeon and an enthusiast of literature. Okay. Geek moment here just for 1 second. How many of you remember the jail scene from the original Ghostbusters where Egon is talking about the surgeon Ivo Shandor, the man responsible for creating the cult of Gozer, which brought Gozer into the modern world and created the cross rip of 1984. If you listen to the explanation of Ivor Back, he's a surgeon and an enthusiast of literature. That's very similar to the creation of Ivo Shandor, the character that Dan Aykroyd, an occultist in his own right, if you know his family history, which we talked about last year during the Halloween season, what, you know, very similar in nature there. So I found that interesting. His poetry often received strong reviews, either positive nor negative, but never sold well. In an attempt to gain more publicity, he issued an award of £100 for the best essay on his work. The winner of this was JFC Fuller, a British Army officer and military historian whose essay, The Star in the West, heralded Crowley's poetry as some of the greatest ever written. Crowley decided to climb Kanchenjunga in the Himalayas of Nepal, widely recognized as the world's most treacherous mountain. The collaboration between Jagat Gillamad, Charles Adolphi, Raymond Alex Pesh, and Alexei C. Rigo de Rihi, the expedition was marred by much argument between Crowley and the others who thought that he was reckless. They eventually mutinied against Crowley's control, with the other climbers heading back down the mountain as nightfall approached. Despite Crowley's warnings, it was too dangerous. Subsequently, Pesci and several porters were killed in an accident, something for which Crowley was widely blamed by the mountaineering community. Spending time in Mohabbanj, where he took part in big game hunting and wrote the homoerotic work The Scented Garden, Crowley met up with Rose and Lilith in Calcutta before being forced to leave India after non-lethally shooting 2 men who tried to mug him. Briefly visiting Bennett in Burma, Crowley and his family decided to tour southern China, hiring porters and a nanny for the purpose. Crowley smoked opium throughout the journey, which took the family from Tenguva through Yucatan, Tali, Unifu, and then Hanoi. On the way, he spent much time on spiritual and magical work, reciting the Bornless ritual and invocation to his holy guardian angel on a daily basis. While Rose and Lilith returned to Europe, Crowley headed to Shanghai to meet an old friend, Elaine Simpson, who was fascinated by the Book of the Law. Together they performed rituals in an attempt to contact Iwas. Crowley then sailed to Japan and Canada before continuing to New York City, where he unsuccessfully solicited support for a second expedition to Kanchenjunga. Upon arrival in Britain, Crowley learned that his daughter Lilith had died of typhoid in Rangoon, something he later blamed on Rose's increasing alcoholism. Under emotional distress, his health began to suffer, and he underwent a series of surgical operations. He began short-lived romances with the actress Vera Lola Neville and author Ada Leverson, while Rose gave birth to Crowley's second daughter, Lola Zaza, in February 1907. The AA and the Holy Books of Thelema, which were written 1907 to 1909. With his old mentor, George Cecil Jones, Crowley continued performing the Abramlin rituals at the Ashdown Park Hotel in Colston, Surrey. Crowley claimed that in doing so, he attained samadhi, or a union with Godhead, thereby marking a turning point in his life, making heavy use of the hashish. During these rituals, he wrote an essay on the psychology of hashish, in which he championed the drug as an aid to mysticism. He also claimed to have been contacted once again by Iwas in late October and November 1907. adding that Iwas dictated two further texts to him, Liber 7 and Liber Cordis Sinti Serpentine, both of which were later classified in the corpus of the Holy Book of Thelema. Crowley wrote down more Thelemic holy books during the last 2 months of the year, including Liber, I'm not even going to try to guess that Roman numeral, Liber Acronomus, and Liber Portus Luci sub figura X. Liber Tau, Liber Trimamen Lamentin, and Liber big long fucking number Vel Arita, which he again claimed to have received from a preternatural source. Crowley stated that in June 1909, when the manuscript for the Book of Law was rediscovered at Boleskine, he developed the opinion that Thelema represented objective truth. Crowley's inheritance was running out, so trying to earn money, he was hired by George Montague Bennett, the Earl of Tankerville, to help protect him from witchcraft. Recognizing Bennett's paranoia and being based in his cocaine addiction, Crowley took him on holiday to France and Morocco to recuperate. In 1907, he also began taking in paying students whom he instructed in occult and magical practice. Victor Newberg, whom Crowley met in February 1907, became his sexual partner and closest disciple. In 1908, the pair toured northern Spain before heading to Tangier, Morocco. The following year, Newberg stayed at Boleskine, where he and Crowley engaged in sadomasochism. Crowley continued to write prolifically, producing such works of poetry as Ambergris, Clouds Without Water, and Conks en Pox, as well as his first attempt at an autobiography, The World's Tragedy. Recognizing the popularity of short horror stories, Crowley wrote his own, some of which were published, and he also published several articles in Vanity Fair, a magazine edited by his friend Frank Harris. He also wrote Liber 777, a book of magical and Kabbalistic correspondence that he borrowed from Mathers and Bennett. The opening lines of Liber 7, the first holy books of Thelema, to be revealed after Crowley, to Crowley after the Book of Law. Quote, "In my loneliness comes the sound of a flute in dim groves that haunt the uttermost hills. Even from the brave river they reach to the edge of the wilderness, and I behold Pan." In November 1907, Crowley and Jones decided to found an occult order to act as the successor to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, being aided in doing so by Fuller. The result was AA. The group's headquarters and temple were situated at 124 Victoria Street in central London, and their rites borrowed much from those of Golden Dawn, but with an added Thelemic basis. The earliest members included solicitor Richard Noel Warren, artist Austin Osman Spare, Horace Sheridan Bickers, author George Rafflich, Francis Henry Evard, Joseph Fielding, engineer Herbert Edward Inman, Kenneth Ward, and Charles Stanfeld Jones. In March of 1909, Crowley began production of a biannual periodical titled The Equinox. He billed the periodical, which was to become the official organ of the AA and the review of the scientific Illuminism. Crowley had become increasingly frustrated with Rose's alcoholism, and in 1909, he divorced her. In November of 1909, divorced her on the grounds of his own adultery. Lola was entrusted to Rose's care. The couple remained friends, and Rose continued to live at Bolesky. Her alcoholism worsened, and as a result, she was institutionalized in September 1911. So at this point, he decides to travel to Algeria and creates the Rites of Ulysses. In November 1909, Crowley and Newberg traveled to Algeria, touring the desert from El Araba to Alume, Bolsada, and then Dal al-Din, with Crowley reciting the Quran on a daily basis. During the trip, he invoked the 30 Aethers of Enochian magic, with Newberg recording the results, later published in the Equinox as The Vision and the Voice. Following a mountaintop sex magic ritual, Crowley also performed an evocation to the demon Corazon involving a blood sacrifice, and considered the results to be a watershed in his magical career. Returning to London, in January 1910, Crowley found that Mathers was suing him for publishing Golden Dawn secrets in the Equinox. The court found in favor of Crowley. The case was widely reported in the press, with Crowley gaining wider fame. Crowley enjoyed this and played up to the sensationalist stereotype of being a Satanist and an advocate for human sacrifice, despite being neither. The publicity attracted new members to the AA, among them Frank Bennett, James Bailey, Herbert Close, and James Windram. The Australian violinist Leela Waddell soon became Crowley's lover. Deciding to expand his teachings to a wider audience, Crowley developed the Rites of Artemis, a public performance of magic and symbolism featuring AA members personifying various deities. It was performed at the AA headquarters, with attendees given a fruit punch containing peyote to enhance their experience. That sounds vaguely familiar as well. Various members of the press attended and reported largely positive on it. In October and November 1910, Crowley decided to stage something similar to the Rites of Ulysses at Caxton Hall, Westminster. This time, press reviews were mixed. Crowley came under particular criticism from West DeWend Fenton, editor of the Looking Glass newspaper, whose article suggested that Crowley and Jones were involved in homosexual activity. Crowley did not mind, but Jones unsuccessfully sued for libel. Fuller broke off his friendship and involvement with Crowley over the scandal, and Crowley and Newberg returned to Algeria for further magical awakenings. So I find that kind of fascinating there. That really the only way Crowley was able to keep this charade of magic and mysticism up was to continue going back and having homosexual sex. Not saying that there's anything wrong with homosexualism. I'm just stating that I think it's kind of funny that that's the only way that they were able to make things work. Or at least in Crowley's mind, that was the only way they were able to make this work. The Equinox continued publishing, and various books of literature of the poetry were also published under its imprint. Like Crowley's Ambergris, The Winged Beetle, and The Scented Garden as well as Newberg's The Triumph of Pan and the Ethel Archer's The Whirlpool in 1911. Crowley and Waddell holidayed in Montigny-sur-Loing, where he wrote prolifically, producing poems, short stories, plays, and 19 works on magic and mythicism, including the 2 final holy books of Thelema. In Paris, he met Mary Desty, who became his next Scarlet Woman. With the 2 undertaking magical workings in St. Mortiz, Crowley believed that one of the secret chiefs, Ab-ul-Diz, was speaking through her. Based on Desty's statement when in trance, Crowley wrote the 2-volume Book 4, and at the time developed the spelling magic in reference to the paranormal phenomenon as a means of distinguishing it from the stage magic of illusionists. So now we're up to the part where he joins the Ordo Templi Orientis and the Paris workings. So in 1912, Crowley published the Book of Lies, a work of mysticism that biographer Lawrence Sutin described as his greatest success in merging his talents as a poet, scholar, and magus. The German occultist Theodor Reuss later accused him of publishing some of the secrets of his own occult order, the Ordo Templi Orientis, within the book. Crowley convinced Ruiz of the OTO's British branch, the Mysteria Mystica Maximum, or Triple M, and at a ceremony in Berlin, Crowley adapted the magical name of Baphomet and was proclaimed ex degree Supreme Rex and Sovereign Grand Master General of Ireland, Iona, and all of the Britons. With Roos's permission, Crowley set about advertising the MMM and rewriting many OTO rituals, which were then based largely on Freemasonry. His incorporation of the Thelmanite elements proved controversial in the group. Fascinated by the OTO's emphasis on sex magic, Crowley devised a magical working based on anal sex and incorporated it into the syllabus for those OTO members who had been initiated into the 11th degree. So here I find it really funny. He claims that he's not a Satanist, that he doesn't believe in Christianity and a lot of the studying of Christianity and things of that nature, yet he takes on the adopted magical name of Baphomet. Baphomet is one of the highest demons and one of the highest soldiers of Satan. So I find that very, very interesting that he would choose that name over any other name. In March 1913, Crowley acted as producer for the Ragged Ragtime Girls, a group of female violinists led by Waddell, as they performed at London's Old Tivoli Theatre. They subsequently performed in Moscow for 6 weeks, where Crowley had a sadomasochistic relationship with the Hungarian Annie Ringler. In Moscow, Crowley continued to write plays and poetry, including Hymn to Pan and the Gnostic Mass, a Thelemic ritual that became a key part of OTO liturgy. Churton suggested that Crowley had traveled to Moscow on the orders of British intelligence to spy on revolutionary elements in the city. In January 1914, Crowley and Newberg settled into an apartment in Paris, where the former was involved in the controversy surrounding Jacob Epstein's new monument to Oscar Wilde. Epstein. Interesting. Together, Crowley and Newberg performed the 6-week Paris working, a period of intense ritual involving strong drug use in which they invoked the gods Mercury and Jupiter. And as part of the ritual, the couple performed acts of sex magic together, at times being joined by journalist Walter Duranty. Inspired by the results of the working, Crowley wrote Liber Agape, a treatise on sex magic. Following the Paris working, Newberg began to distance himself from Crowley, resulting in an argument in which Crowley cursed him. So now by this point, he's in the United States. He was living hand-to-mouth existence in 1914, relying largely on donations from AA members and dues payments made to OTO in May. He transferred ownership of Boleskine House to the Triple M for financial reasons, and in July went mountaineering in the Swiss Alps. During this time, the First World War broke out, and after recuperating from bouts of philibits, Crowley set sail for the United States aboard the RMS Lithuania. In October 1914, arriving in New York City, he moved into a hotel and began earning money writing for the American edition of Vanity Fair, undertaking freelance work for the famed astrologer Evangeline Adams. In the city, he continued experiencing sex magic through the use of masturbation, female prostitutes, male clients of a Turkish bathhouse, and all the encounters were documented in his diaries. Professing to be of Irish ancestry and a supporter of Irish independence from Great Britain, Crowley began to espouse support for Germany in their war effort against Britain. He became involved in New York's pro-German movement, and in January 1915, German spy George Sylvester Verekek employed him as a writer for his propagandist newspaper, The Fatherland, which was dedicated to keeping the U.S. neutral in the conflict in later years. Detractors denounced Crowley as a traitor to Britain for his actions. Crowley entered into a relationship with Janine Robert Foster, with whom he toured the West Coast. In Vancouver, headquarters of the North American OTO, he met with Charles Stansfeld Jones and Wilfred Talbot Smith to discuss the propagation of thelema on the continent. In Detroit, he experimented with peyote at Park Davis, then visited Seattle, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, San Diego, Tijuana, and the Grand Canyon. Before returning to New York, there he befriended Ananda Kumaraswamy and his wife, Alice Richardson. Crowley and Richardson performed sex magic in April 1916, following which she became pregnant and then miscarried. Later that year, he took a magical retirement to a cabin by Lake Pasquaney owned by Evangeline Adams. There he made heavy use of drugs and undertook a ritual, after which he proclaimed himself Master Therion. He also wrote several short stories based on J.G. Frazier's The Golden Bough and a work of literary criticism, The Gospel According to Bernard Shaw. In December, he moved to New Orleans, his favorite U.S. city, before spending February 1917 with evangelical Christian relatives in Tuittsville, Florida. Returning to New York City, he moved in with an artist and AA member, Leon Engers Kennedy, in May. Learning of his mother's death after the collapse of the Fatherland, Crowley continued his association with Viereck, who appointed him contributing editor of arts journal The International. Crowley used it to promote thelema, but it soon ceased production. He then moved to the studio apartment of Roddy Miner, who became his partner and Scarlet Woman. Through their rituals, which Crowley called the Alamaranth workings, he believed they were contacted by a pre-eternatural entity named Lamb. The relationship soon ended. In 1918, Crowley went on a magical retreat in the wilderness of Espas Island on the Hudson River. Here, he began a translation of the Tao Te Ching, painted thalamic symbols on the riverside cliffs, and he later claimed experienced past life memories of being J. Juan, Pope Alexander the Fourth, the Sixth, Alessandro Cagliostro, and Eliphas Levi. Back in New York City, he moved to Greenwich Village, where he took Leah Hersig as his lover and next Scarlet Woman. He took up painting as a hobby, exhibiting his work at the Greenwich Village Liberal Club and attracting the attention of the New York evening world. With financial assistance of sympathetic Freemasons, Crowley revived the Equinox with the first issue of Volume 3, known as the Blue Equinox. He spent mid-1919 on a climbing holiday at Montauk before returning to London in December. All right, so we all know that he's destitute in London, so he wants to move out of there pretty quick. So now we are on to the Abbey of Thelema. So now destitute and back in London, Crowley came under attack from the tabloid John Bull, which labeled him traitorous scum for his work with the German war effort. Several friends aware of his intelligence work urged him to sue, but he decided not to. When he was suffering from asthma, a doctor prescribed him heroin, to which he soon became addicted. So let's talk about that a little bit. Back in this time, heroin was not considered to be a controlled substance, and it wasn't a drug. It was actually a painkiller. So if anyone had seen the TV show La Brea, they discover that there is a drug dealer on the island with them, and he brought a shit ton of heroin with him. And there is an actual doctor there, and he even points out the fact that heroin has been used as painkiller in the past. Pretty much tells the people that we're going to use this heroin as painkiller. So it's not surprising to see here that they were using heroin at this time. In July 1920, he moved to Paris, renting a house in Fontainebleau with Leah Hersig. They were soon joined in a menage a trois by Nanette Shumway, also in a living arrangement by Leah's newborn daughter, Anne Poupée Lay. Crowley had ideas of forming a community of Thelemites, which he called the Abbey of Thelema, after the Abbé de Theleme in Francois Rabelais' satire Gargantua and Pantagruel. After consulting the I Ching, he chose Cefalù on Sicily, Italy as a location, and after arriving there, began renting the old Villa Santa Barbara as his abbey on April 2nd. Moving to the commune with Hersig, Shumway, and their children Hansi, Howard, and Poupée, Crowley described the scenario as a perfectly happy and my idea of heaven. They wore robes and performed rituals to the sun god Ra, and at set times during the day, and also occasionally performing the Gnostic Mass. The rest of the day, they were left to follow their own interests. Undertaking widespread correspondence, Crowley continued to paint, wrote a commentary on the Book of the Law, and revised the third part of Book 4. He offered a libertine education for the children, allowing them to play all day and witness acts of sex magic. He occasionally traveled to Palermo to visit rent boys and buy supplies, including drugs. His heroin addiction came to dominate his life, and cocaine began to erode his nasal cavity. There was no cleaning rota, and wild dogs and cats wandered throughout the building, which soon became unsanitary. Poupée died in October 1920, and Nanette gave birth to a daughter, Astar Lulu Panthea, soon afterwards. New followers continued to arrive at the Abbey to be taught by Crowley. Among them, film star Jane Wolfe, who arrived in July 1920, where she was also initiated into the AA and became Crowley's secretary. Another was Cecil Frederick Russell, who often argued with Crowley, disliking the same-sex sexual magic that he was required to perform, and left after just a year. More conductive was the Australian Thelemite Frank Bennett, who also spent several months at the Abbey. In February 1922, Crowley returned to Paris for a retreat in an unsuccessful attempt to kick his heroin habit. He then went to London in search of money, where he published articles in the English Review criticizing the Dangerous Drugs Act 1920, and wrote a novel, Diary of a Drug Fiend, completed in July. Upon publication, it received mixed reviews. He was lambasted by the Sunday Express, which called for its burning and used its influence to prevent further reprints. Subsequently, a young Thelemite named Raoul Loveday moved to the Abbey with his wife, Betty May. While Loveday was devoted to Crowley, May detested him and life at the commune. She later said that Loveday was made to drink the blood of a sacrificed cat, and that they were required to cut themselves with razors every time they used the pronoun I. Lovejoy drank from a local polluted stream, soon developing a liver infection, resulting in his death in February 1923. Returning to London, May told her story to the press. John Bull proclaimed Crowley the wickedest man in the world and a man we'd like to hang. Although Crowley deemed many of their accusations against him to be slanderous, he was unable to afford legal fees to sue them. As a result, John Bull continued his attack, with its stories being repeated in newspapers throughout Europe and in North America. The fascist government of Benito Mussolini learned of Crowley's activities, and in April 1923, he was given a deportation notice, forcing him to leave Italy. Without him, the Abbey closed. So we are now getting to the kind of the end of Aleister Crowley's life here. So Tunisia, Paris, and London. Crowley and Herzig went to Tunis, where dogged by continuing poor health, he unsuccessfully tried again to give up heroin and began writing what he termed his autobiography, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. They were joined in Tunis by the Thelemite Norman Mudd, who became Crowley's public relations consultant. Employing a local boy, Mohammed Ben Brahim, as his servant, Crowley went with him on a retreat to Nefta, where they performed sex magic together. In January 1924, Crowley traveled to Nice, Germany, where he met Frank Harris, underwent a series of nasal operations, and visited the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man, and had a positive opinion of its founder, George Gurdjieff. Destitute, he took on a wealthy student, Alexander Zowar, before taking on another American follower, Dorothy Olson. Crowley took Olson back to Tunisia for a magical retreat in Nefta, where he also wrote To Man, a declaration of his own status as a prophet entrusted with bringing Thelema to humanity. After spending the winter in Paris in early 1925, Crowley and Olson returned to Tunis, where he wrote The Heart of the Master, an account of a vision he experienced in a trance. In March, Olson became pregnant, and Herzig was called to take care of her. She miscarried, following which Crowley took Olson back to France. Herzig later distanced herself from Crowley, who then denounced her. According to Crowley, Roos named him the head of the OTO upon his death, but this was challenged by a leader of the German OTO, Heinrich Tronker. Trenker, actually, I'm sorry, because there's an umlaut there. Trenker called the Hulabin Conference in Thuringia, Germany, which Crowley attended. There, prominent members like Karl Germer and Martha Kunzel championed Crowley's leadership, but other key figures like Albin Grau, Oskar Hopfer, and Henri Biervin backed Trenker by opposing it, resulting in a split in the OTO moving to Paris, where he broke with Olson in 1926. Crowley went through a large number of lovers over the following years, with whom he experimented in sex magic. This dude is the definition of a fucking sex addict. And not just with women, but with men too. It's crazy. Throughout, he was dogged by poor health, largely caused by heroin and cocaine addictions. In 1928, Crowley was introduced to a young Englishman, Israel Regardi, who embraced Thelema and became Crowley's secretary for the next 3 years. That year, Crowley also met Gerald York, who began organizing Crowley's finances, but never became a Thelemite. He also befriended the homosexual journalist Tom Dryburgh. Dryburgh did not accept Thelema either. It was here that Crowley also published one of his most significant works, Magic in Theory and Practice, in which he received little attention at the time. In December 1928, Crowley met the Nicaraguan Maria Teresa Sanchez. Crowley was deported from France by the authorities, who disliked his reputation and feared he was a German agent. So that she could join him in Britain, Crowley married Sanchez in August 1929. Now based in London, Mandrake Press agreed to publish his autobiography limited edition 6-volume set, also publishing his novel Moonchild and a book of short stories, The Stratagem. Mandrake went into liquidation in November 1930 before the entirety of Crowley's confessions could be published. Mandrake's owner, P.R. Stevenson, meanwhile, wrote The Legend of Aleister Crowley, an analysis of the media coverage surrounding him. In April 1930, Crowley moved to Berlin, where he took Hanni Jaeger as his magical partner. The relationship was troubled. In September, he went to Lisbon in Portugal to meet the poet Fernando Pessoa. There, he decided to fake his own death, doing so with Pessoa's help at the Boca do Inferno rock formation. He then returned to Berlin, where he reappeared 3 weeks later at the opening of his art exhibition at the Gallery Neumann Nierendorf. Crowley's paintings fitted with the fashion for German Expressionism. Few of them sold, but the press reports were largely favorable. In August of 1931, he took Bertha Bush as his new lover. They had a violent relationship and often physically assaulted one another. He continued to have affairs with both men and women while in the city and met with famous people like Aldous Huxley and Alfred Adler. Adler. After befriending him in January 1932, he took the communist Gerald Hamilton as a lodger, through whom he was introduced to many figures within the Berlin far left. It is possible he was operating as a spy for British intelligence at the time, monitoring the communist movement. Crowley left Bush and returned to London, where he took Pearl Brooksmith as his new Scarlet Woman. Undergoing further nasal surgery, it was here in 1932 he was invited to be a guest of honor at Foyle's literary luncheon, also being invited by Harry Price to speak at the National Laboratory of Psychical Research. In need of money, he launched a series of court cases against people whom he believed had libeled him, some of which he proved successful. He gained much publicity for his lawsuit against Constable and Co. for publishing Nina Hammett's Laughing Torso, a book he claimed libeled him by referring to cult practices as black magic. But he lost the case. The court case added to Crowley's financial problems, and in February 1935, he was declared bankrupt. During the hearing, it was revealed that Crowley had been spending 3 times his income for years. Quote, I have been over 40 years engaged in the administration of the law in one capacity or another. I thought I knew of every conceivable form of wickedness. I thought that everything which was vicious and bad had been produced at one time or another before me. I have learnt in this case that we can always learn something more if we live long enough. I have never heard such dreadful, horrible, blasphemous, and abominable stuff as that to which has been produced by the man Crowley, who describes himself to you as the greatest living poet. That was a quote from Justice Swift in Crowley's libel cases. Crowley developed a friendship with Deidre Patricia Doherty. She offered to bear his child, who was born in 1937, named Randall Gare. Crowley nicknamed him Aleister Atakirk. He died in a car accident in 2002 at the age of 65. Crowley continued to socialize with his friends, holding curry parties in which he cooked particularly spicy food for them. In 1936, he published his first book in 6 years, The Equinox of the Gods, which contained a facsimile of the Book of Law and was considered to be volume 3, number 3 of the Equinox periodical. The work sold well, resulting in a second print run in 1937. He gave a series of public lectures on yoga in Soho. Crowley was now living largely off contributions supplied by the OTO's Agape Lounge in California, led by rocket scientist John Whiteside Jack Parsons. Crowley was intrigued by the rise of Nazism in Germany and influenced by his friends Martha Kunzel, believed that Adolf Hitler might convert to Thalaism when the Nazis abolished the German OTO and imprisoned Germer, who fled to the U.S. Crowley then lambasted Hitler as a black magician. We're getting down to the end of the days here of old Aleister Crowley. When the Second World War broke out, Crowley wrote to the Naval Intelligence Division offering his services, but they declined. He associated with a variety of figures in Britain's intelligence community at the time, including Dennis Wheatley, Roland Rail Dahl, Ian Fleming, and Maxwell Knight, and claimed to have been behind the V for Victory sign first used by the BBC. This has never been proven, and in 1940 his asthma worsened, and with his German-produced medication unavailable, he returned to using heroin, once again becoming addicted. As the Blitz hit London, Crowley relocated to Torquay, where he was briefly hospitalized with asthma and entertaining himself with the visits of the local chess club. Tiring of Turkey, he returned to London, where he was visited by American Thelemite Grady McMurdy, to whom Crowley awarded the Jimenez Alpha. He stipulated that though Germer would be his immediate successor, McMurty would succeed Germer as head of the OTO and the latter's death. After the latter's death, with OTO initiate Lady Frida Harris, Crowley developed plans to produce a tarot card set designed by him and painted by Harris. Accompanying this was a book published in a limited edition as the Book of Thought by Chiswick Press in 1944. To aid the war effort, he wrote a proclamation on the rights of humanity, Liber Oz, and a poem for the liberation of France, Les Gaulois. Crowley's final publication during his lifetime was a book of poetry, Allah, an anthology of 60 years of song. Another of his projects, Aleister Explains Everything, was posthumously published as Magic Without Tears. In April 1944, Crowley briefly moved to Aston Clinton in Buckinghamshire, where he was visited by the poet Nancy Cunard, before relocating to Hastings in Sussex, where he took up residence as the Netherworld boarding house. He took a young man named Kenneth Grant as his secretary, paying him in magical teachings rather than wages. He was also introduced to John Simmons, whom he appointed to be his literary executor. Simmons thought little of Crowley, later publishing negative biographies of him, corresponding with the illusionist Arnold Crowther. It was through him that Crowley was introduced to Gerald Gardner, the future founder of Guardian Wicca, and they became friends, with Crowley authorizing Gardner to revive Britain's ailing OTO. Another visitor was Eliza Marine Butler, who interviewed Crowley for her book, The Myth of the Magus. Other friends and family also spent time with him, among them Doherty and Crowley's son, Aleister Ataturk. On December 1st, 1947, Crowley died at the Netherwood of chronic bronchitis aggravated by pleurisy and myocardial degeneration at age 72. His funeral was held at the Brighton Crematorium on December 5th. About a dozen people attended, and Lewis Wilkinson read excerpts from the Gnostic Mass, Book of the Law, and the Hymn to Pan. The funeral generated press controversy and was labeled as a black mass by the tabloids. Crowley's body was cremated. His ashes were sent to Carl Germer in the U.S., who buried them in the garden in Hampton, New Jersey. So we talked about his beliefs and thoughts. We can get into political views here real quick. Crowley enjoyed being outrageous and flouting conventional morality, with John Simmons noting that he was in revolt against the moral and religious values of his time. Crowley's political thought was studied by academic Marco Passi, who noted that for Crowley, socio-political concerns were subordinate to metaphysical and spiritual ones. He was neither on the political left nor right, but perhaps best categorized as a conservative revolutionary. Despite not being affiliated with the German-based conservative revolutionary movement, Posse described Crowley's fascination to the extreme ideologies of Nazism and Marxism-Leninism, which aimed to violently overturn society. Quote, what Crowley liked about Nazism and communism, or at least what made him curious about them, was the anti-Christian position and the revolutionary and socially subversive implications of these two movements. In their submersive powers, he saw the possibility of an annihilation of the old religious traditions and the creation of a void that Thelema subsequently would be able to fill. Crowley described democracy as an imbecile and nauseating cult of weakness, and commented that the Book of Law proclaimed there is the master and there is the slave, the noble and the serf, the lone wolf and the herd. In this attitude, he was influenced by the work of Friedrich Nietzsche and the social Darwinism. Although he had contempt for most of the British aristocracy, whatever, he regarded himself as an aristocrat and styled himself as Laird Boleskine, once describing his ideology as aristocratic communism. As it comes to race and gender, Crowley was bisexual but exhibited a preference for women, with his relationships with men being fewer and mostly in the early part of his life. In particular, he had an attraction toward exotic women and claimed to have fallen in love with on multiple occasions. Kaczynski stated that when he loved, he did so with his whole being, but the passion was typically short-lived. Even in his later life, Crowley was able to attract young bohemian women to be his lovers, largely due to his charisma. He applied the term Scarlet Woman to various female lovers whom he believed played an important role in his magical work. During homosexual acts, he usually played the passive role, which Booth believed appealed to his masochistic side. As underlying theme in many of his writings is what spiritual enlightenment arises through transgressing sociosexual norms. Crowley advocated the complete sexual freedom for both men and women. He argued that homosexual and bisexual people should not suppress their sexual orientation, commenting that a person must not be ashamed or afraid of being homosexual if he happens to be so at heart. He must not attempt to violate his own true nature because of public opinion or medieval morality or religious prejudice, which would wish he were otherwise. On other issues, he adapted a more conservative attitude, which he opposed abortion on moral grounds, believing that no woman following her true will would ever desire one. Biographer Lawrence Sutin stated that blatant bigotry is a persistent minor element in Crowley's writings. A spoiled scion of wealthy Victorian family who embodied many of the worst John Bull racial and social prejudices of his upper-class contemporaries. Noting that he embodied the contradiction that withered within many Western contemporaries. Noting that he embodied the contradiction, intellectuals of this time, deeply held racist viewpoints, courtesy of society, coupled with a fascination with people of color. Crowley is said to have insulted his close Jewish friend Victor Benjamin Newberg using anti-Semitic slurs, and he had mixed opinions about Jewish people as a group. Although he praised their sublime poetry and stated that they exhibited imagination, romance, loyalty, probity, and humanity, he also thought that centuries of persecution had led some Jewish people to exhibit avarice, servility, falseness, cunning, and at the rest. He was also known to praise various ethnic and cultural groups. For instance, he thought the Chinese people exhibited a spiritual superiority to the English and praised Muslims for exhibiting manliness, straightforwardness, subtlety, and self respect. Both critics of Crowley and adherents of the Thelema have accused Crowley of sexism. Booth described Crowley as exhibiting a general misogyny, something the biographer believed arose from Crowley's bad relationship with his mother. Sutton noted that Crowley largely accepted the notion implicitly embodied in Victorian sexology of women as a secondary social being in terms of intelligence and sensibility. The scholar of religion Manon Hindenburg White noted that some of Crowley's statements are undoubtedly misogynistic by contemporary standards, but characterized Crowley's attitude towards women as a complex and multifaceted. Crowley's comments on women's roles vary dramatically within his written work, even that produced in similar periods. Crowley described women as moral inferiors who had been treated with firmness, kindness, and justice, while also arguing that Thelema was essential to a woman's emancipation. So, as to his legacy and influence, he is today looked upon as a source of inspiration by many people in search of spiritual enlightenment and or instructions in magical practice. Thus, while during his life his books hardly sold and his disciples were never very numerous, nowadays all his important works are constantly in print, and the people defining themselves as Thelemites, that is, followers of Crowley's new religion, number several thousands all over the world. Furthermore, Crowley's influence over magically oriented new religious movements has in some cases been very deep and pervasive. It would be difficult to understand, for instance, some aspects of the Anglo-Saxon neo-paganism and contemporary Satanism without a solid knowledge of Crowley's doctrines and ideas. In other fields such as poetry, alpinism, and painting, he may have been a minor figure, but it is only fair to admit that in the limited context of occultism, he has played and still plays a major role. So he remained an influential figure both amongst occultists and in popular culture, particularly that of Britain, but also other parts of the world. In 2002, BBC poll placed Crowley 73rd in a list of 100 Great Britons. Rutherford Cavendish had written of him in Native Talent, Penetrating Intelligence, and Determination. Aleister Crowley was the best equipped magician to emerge since the 17th century. The scholar of esotericism, Eagle Aspram, described him as one of the most well-known figures in modern occultism. The scholar of esotericism, Walter Hagengraf, asserted that Crowley was an extreme representation of the dark side of the occult, adding he was the most notorious occultist magician of the 20th century. Philosopher John Moore opined that Crowley stood out as a modern master when compared with other prominent occult figures like George Jurdeff, P.D. Opensky, Rudolf Steiner, and Helena Blavatsky. Also described him as a living embodiment of Oswald Spengler's Faustian Man. Biographer Tobias Churton described Crowley as a pioneer of the consciousness research. Hunt noted that Crowley had an important place in the history of modern Western responses to Oriental spiritual traditions. While Sutton thought that he had made distinctly original contributions to the study of yoga in the West. So, this goes on and on with a lot of the other things. Most importantly that I wanted to talk about here, occultist Diane Fortune used Crowley as a basis for characters in her books The Secret of Dr. Taverner, and The Winged Bull. He was included in one of the figures of the cover of the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and his motto of "Do what thou wilt" was inscribed on the vinyl of Led Zeppelin's album Led Zeppelin 3. Led Zeppelin co-founder Jimmy Page bought Bolenskine in 1971, and part of the band's film "The Song Remains the Same" was filmed on the grounds. He sold it in 1992. Though David Bowie makes but a fleeting reference to Crowley in the lyrics of his song Quicksand, it has been suggested that the lyrics of Bowie's #1 hit single Let's Dance may subsequently paraphrase Crowley's 1923 film lyric of the love to Leah. Ozzy Osbourne and his lyricist Bob Daisley wrote a song titled Mr. Crowley, a prophetic quote about the coming of the new eon borrowed from Crowley's work Magic and the Theory of Practice, has been featured in the opening introduction to the video game Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, and Crowley began to receive scholarly attention from academics in the late 1990s. So we went a little over there, but there was a lot to get in and a lot to digest in this telling of the history of Aleister Crowley. Hopefully everybody got to learn something here today. If not, I apologize about that. This was a very heavy subject, but if you're going to talk about the occult, you can't do it without discussing Aleister Crowley. He is the godfather of the occult, and a lot of the practices of the occult did not exist before him. And you can hear in this how deeply sought after his beliefs are when it comes to the occult nowadays, especially dealing with the Church of Satan and even some witchcraft practices. But that's going to do it for Money's Crazy Mind this week. Thank you, everybody, for checking the show out. Remember, next week I am getting tattooed live on the air at Tattoo Therapy Inc. at their new location, 2951 Pearl Road. Still in the Greenbrier Shopping Center, just a few doors down to the left. We will be broadcasting live from 6 to 10 p.m. from Tattoo Therapy Inc. So can't wait to see everybody next week. Hopefully you guys will check out the show while you get inked, and I'll be interviewing the owner of Tattoo Therapy Inc., Riley Chase. Until next week, everybody, have a week.
Money's Crazy Mind is proud to be a Redline Promotions and Nameless Fate production.
That's all, folks.